Hello, my name is Dr. Reinicke Lengel, and I work for Athabasca University in Canada. I'm in Canada right now. And I also work for The Hague University in the Netherlands. I work in the area of writing and healing. And I work also in the research area and the theoretical area. And today I'm here to explain the model of writing through transformation so you understand it from the perspective of people who are in grief. Now, I have a background in using writing the self in a number of ways, but most recently in the last 2 years, I've been using it to apply to grief because I lost my spouse in November 2018. As a result of that happening, he was ill with cancer and died over a 7-month period. I wrote a book called Writing the Self in Bereavement. And in that book, I apply the same theories that I applied to when you use writing for well-being in any context, and I'm going to explain that model to you now. Okay. Well, as you'll see, I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way and hold up a piece of paper, and probably in the notebooks that you have in the course you might be currently taking, you will also have a picture of this model. So I'm just going to show it to you here, and then you can follow along with the references that you have. So, in life, imagine we're going along through life. Things are going quite well. We have our stresses and our struggles. But then something happens in our lives that is so profoundly difficult that we can no longer cope the way that we used to. So in the beginning, when I described the model, the first thing that is the impetus for our change processes is a tragedy or a difficult situation of some kind. For instance, the loss of somebody we love dearly, the loss of a child to death through illness or stillbirth, or any other kind of losses that are very profound and that really shake our world. Now, that is what we call a boundary experience. And it's a situation or event or attitude where we know our life will be unalterably changed. Now, as human beings, we are made to cope with all sorts of strains and stresses, but when we have a boundary experience in our lives, usually our default position is to tell ourselves a very tragic story about that happening. So I'll show you the model again. So here we have the boundary experience, and then we have the first story. We have the very first story that we go into, and that is a fight or flight or fleeing type story. And it is characterized by things like feeling like a victim, feeling entitled. You know, life should have given us more. Life should have kept our beloved alive. Life should not have taken our baby from us. That's entitlement. Rescue, where we feel somebody else should help us, save us. They should be there for us, and they might not be. Or blame. Blaming life, blaming God, blaming somebody close to us in our lives for the tragedy. Those things all belong to the realm of the very first story we tell about something that's very difficult in our lives. But we don't want to stay in the first story. It's a very human thing to do. It's a very human place to go. We have all been there. And yet we don't want to stay in that story. You could say the first story is characterized by the fact that our assumptive world has been shattered, and we tell a stuck or suffering story about that occurrence in our lives. It's not fair. It shouldn't have happened, if only. And we are very much in our pain at that time. So with writing the self processes and writing in grief, what we understand is that eventually we'll be writing our way towards a second story. And a second story is when we truly can integrate the loss and make it a part of our reality. And it often deepens us. It brings more compassion to other people. We understand that death is part of life, but it's not a rationalization. So a second story, which is on the other side of the model, here, the second story, which we eventually get to, is that place in life where we have an acceptance of what is. But how do we get there? We cannot just simply jump from a first stuck in suffering story to a second story of feeling okay. So this is where the writing comes in a number of ways. First of all, writing exercises like the proprioceptive writing method you may be familiar with gives us an opportunity to get in touch with our thoughts and feelings around a particular event. And it includes that first suffering story, but it also includes a range of other things. So for instance, I'll tell this story of my own loss. I had a miscarriage in 2001 as well, so I'll tell you about that loss, since this relates also to loss of children. So when I first had the miscarriage, my story was, this is bad, this is sad. I wanted a second child and it was not happening. I had a miscarriage. But when I started writing, there were many voices that were actually present in my being. It was not just only the bad and the sad voices. I also noticed as I was writing things down that there was a voice that said, this is just nature happening. And I thought, oh, interesting. Okay. There was also a mother voice, and the mother voice said, just take good care of yourself. This is a sad moment in your life, so take good care of yourself. There was also sort of a scientist part of me that said, oh, I wonder why that happened, what biologically created the circumstances for this loss. So I got curious as well. Then there was a very rational part of me that said, oh, well, at least now I can, work with bedroom paint. I can paint the bedroom and not worry. I can fix up some things around the house. I don't have to be as careful as if I were pregnant. So these were all different voices that were also present in the face of the sadness that I felt. And it was interesting to note that. And in the phase model that you can see on the model is the sensing phase. And that's where I was in when I was able to, in writing, articulate some of my thoughts and feelings. So writing gives us the opportunity to be present to our loss, but in a number of different ways that is more varied than our first story, which is just, it's bad, it's sad. Okay, so there's more variety there. We understand that we actually have more internal resources as well. And as you see from the model, you'll see sensing and then sifting and then focusing and then understanding. Those are the 4 phases we sort of go through. It's not always a linear process, but those learning stages go from just expressing everything randomly, sensing, sifting to sort of sort them like, okay, there's a part of me that's so deeply sad, but there's a part of me that's also really resilient as well. Interesting just to notice those 2 things. And then when we come to the focusing phase, we might realize, for instance, that in our sadness, one of the reasons we might be even holding on to sadness is because we associate it with the bond we might still have with the lost one, like the lost child or the lost partner. So we might say, oh, if I stay sad, I will be faithful to my love for that person. So in the focusing stage, sadness suddenly has a different feel to it, where in the first story, sadness was like, oh, this is terrible. And in the sensing phase, it was like, oh, interesting, there's sadness, but there are also other things. And in the sifting phase, we say, oh, there's resilience and there's sadness. And in the focusing phase, which other writing exercises are very suitable to explain, we may actually say, interesting that sometimes I notice when I'm happy looking out the window at the birds that I feel guilty because I think, oh, my child is gone and I must, or my partner has died and I must not be happy because that wouldn't be loyal to that person. So in focusing, we understand more. We start looking clearly and closely at the quality of that sadness. And we can do some writing and some poetry. For instance, we might do a poem about the beautiful bird that was in the yard and say, I miss my beloved child, and there's a beautiful bird right now in the yard. And both of them are welcome in my world, and it's okay. So, and then we come to understanding that grief is something that comes in waves. For instance, we might have that insight. We might also come to a realization about ourselves, like we want to be a loyal person. So we say, oh, my sadness is often deeper because I want to be such a loyal person. I want to be a loyal person to my dead child or my dead spouse. And so it's difficult for us sometimes to let go of some of the grief that is already letting go of us. Sometimes we're even holding on more to grief because we want to define ourselves and our identity as being very loyal. And those are beautiful things, of course, to be very loyal to our loved ones. And at the same time, we can also say, and I also want to be loyal to my life that I've been given, and I'm still here, you know? So those 4 phases, different writing exercises sort of fit with the different phases, and slowly but surely they take our story and allow it to be transformed into a second story that feels true. So if we were to skip from a first story direct to a second story, we would not feel that it's true for us. But when we go through the writing and include our emotions and our thoughts as we go through that narrative process, in the second story, we say, yes, I had a child who I lost, or I had my beautiful partner, Franz, but he got cancer and he died. And that is how life is sometimes. And that is how life is. Life brings me everything that I've ever had and loved. And life also has taken away things that I have loved. And I had no control over any of it. All I can do is feel my love and honor that. And so in my second story, I spent a whole year and a half writing this book. And I started with my deep sadness and some unfinished business even that Franz and I had. And then slowly but surely, I worked towards the second story. And the second story that I tell, for instance, is now I have something to share with people that can also benefit them. And so I'm fortunate. So back to the model for a minute. Here we see the model again. And in the middle, there's this infinity symbol, you know. And this is also part of the beauty of writing. And this is actually the motor that takes us through these phases of sensing, sifting, focusing, and understanding. So the model inside, you'll see, is a dialogue with myself through writing often, and a dialogue with others. So for instance, writing poetry gives me some time to spend some time with my internal dialogue. And then I might share it with a good friend who's non-judging of my writing and read the poem about my lost beloved, my son or my daughter or my spouse. I say, oh, this is a poem I wrote about him. And the friend will say, oh, yeah. And then you say, yeah, that touches my heart. And then you say, you know, when I wrote that poem, I was thinking this, and then I was thinking that. And then after the phone call with your friend, you sit down and you think, oh, how does it feel for me now? Oh, I feel a bit lighter that I've shared this poem. So this internal and the external dialogue, also when you're taking a course about writing and grief, the external dialogue is also with the other people in the course that are bereaved and also with the instructor. And the writing gives us this chance to go inside internally and connect with ourselves. So that model, that you could say that's the engine that drives us slowly from sensing, sifting, focusing to understanding. And all the while, the beauty of being able to write in a difficult situation in life is that we have the observer in the middle. And here again, the observer is here in the model. And the observer allows us to witness our lives while we're going through it. So when my husband died, I held him while he was dying. And there was a part of me completely present and loving him in my heart, loving him and saying my last words to him, and he saying his last words to me. And there was also a part of me that later could observe that, and I could write about what actually happened. And that little bit of ability to be present to the situation and observe it at the same time by, for instance, writing poems about it later and writing the book about it later, allowed me that healthy distance I needed to also be able to tell a new story. So we go from a first to a second story, and as a result of that, a difficult, heart-breaking experience turns into an experience of learning for us and a gift that we can also share with others. It deepens us and it makes us more rich in what we are able to live and what we're able to share. And while we're in the middle of our deep pain, it doesn't feel like that, and we wish it just didn't happen and shouldn't have happened, and we're very torn by that. But slowly but surely, we retell the story of life, and we're able to come to a certain integration and peace with that. And that's what the model shows. And it's a wonderful way to understand that when you're in deep pain and you're complaining about that perhaps, or you're repeating yourself many times, that you are in a first story. That's all. You're in a first story, and that second story is waiting for you as you do your work, and you slowly will live towards that second story. Have compassion for yourself and kindness on this journey, this creative journey of living and accepting the losses that come along. No one can make you accept losses. You develop slowly the ability, and then you notice that one day you have actually accepted the loss and integrated it in a new way. So that is the story of the model of writing and healing that I developed along with my partner, who now has died. My name is Reineke Lengel. His name was Frans Meijers. He was a professor in the Netherlands. I'm a professor here in Canada. And I also want to bring your attention to this lovely book by one of my students, and it's called Remembering Michael, Rewriting My Story of Stillbirth by Danielle Larocque. And she writes about the loss of her child. Her child died just about a day or two before he was going to be born. And then she gave birth to him, and he was, of course, not alive. And so heartbreaking. But her story is beautiful. She's able to tell how she started with that first story and slowly worked herself towards the second story through life and through support of others. We do not grieve alone. We are always in support, supported by others. And she describes the model in the book too, and how she applied it to her grieving and her loss. So, blessing you, encouraging you to write and to be guided in your process of going from a first to a second story. Thank you.